We admire the great civilizations, such as, for example, the Egyptians. And why is that? Because they have invented so many great things that we're still using after 5,000 years, like paper and writing, mirrors or glass, or what is even more important for some people, beer. Or take the Chinese. They've invented porcelain, gunpowder, compasses, printing, or silk. Or the Greek. They've invented windmills, and what is maybe more important today, philosophy and democracy. Or the Romans, who invented cement, paved roads, bridge construction, or Roman law, which very much is the basis of law today still. So what about the next civilization? Are we doing well? Doesn't seem so really. We have a lot of problems in the world. Financial and economic and debt crisis, social and political unrest in many countries all over the world. We're struggling with global warming, with organized crime, cybercrime, or the quick spreading of emerging diseases. So what can we do? What does it take actually to create the next big civilization? Well, maybe data can change the situation. It can be a game changer. We can actually, what I am arguing for, we can create a participatory society, Swiss style, but also in our market economy. And data will enable this to happen. So given all the data in the world that we are now basically collecting, what can we do with these data? We can craft new instruments to explore the world in the very same way as we have actually created telescopes and microscopes or X-ray devices in order to see things that we would otherwise not see. And for example, we can measure and predict epidemic spreading, or we can measure and predict tension in the world, and with this conflict probabilities, things that we can't see with our plain eyes. But data allow us basically to measure all these things. Now, given all those data, what can we do with it? How would we take decisions? And there are a number of different ideas around. For example, great philosophers and economists have been inspired by beehives and ant colonies, those social insects that have something like a society, although there is nobody who really gives commands. So the fable of bees basically was also the basis of Adam Smith's idea of the invisible hand. And he said, if everybody is just doing the best for himself or herself, that's also going to create the best outcome for our economy and for our society. It's kind of magic. And sometimes it actually works. Take those pedestrians over here. They're organizing themselves into lanes of different walking directions that's separating basically the streams of motion. It's creating very efficient flows. And it doesn't take any laws or regulations or policemen over here. It just happens automatically. People don't even have to think about it. They don't even notice it. It happens in a subconscious, automatic way. So wouldn't it be nice if the world would work like this? So here the invisible hand really is working wonderfully, but what about the Love Parade disaster that happened in Duisburg some time back? How could it happen? Nobody wanted to harm anybody. So can we trust into the invisible hand? Maybe not always. We're struggling with tragedies of the common, such as environmental exploitation or environmental pollution or overfishing, global warming. And the question is, why is this happening? Nobody wants these things to happen. And in order to give you an idea, I'm showing you these phantom traffic jams. It's not difficult to drive in a circle, you would think. But nevertheless, after some time, you see that people are stopped, although nobody wants this to happen. How can that be? I mean, they basically have all the information they need. They have good technologies. They have the best intentions. How can it happen? So if we would ask people, what is the reason for this? They would say, gosh, there was a stupid driver in front of me who didn't know how to drive. But the real reason is a different one. Basically, there's always a small variation in the speed, and drivers have to respond to this. But they respond with a small delay. And in order to compensate for this delay, they have to brake a little bit harder. That creates an amplification effect. And the next driver even has to brake a little bit harder. So there is a chain reaction, a cascade effect basically, that finally makes people stop, although nobody wants this to happen. Now this is just one example of a systemic instability where things happen that people don't want to happen, despite all the best intentions. When the system is operated in the wrong parameter regime, here at too high densities, things are just getting out of control, sooner or later. So we can understand these kind of phenomena. And what is concerning is that as we are networking the world, this is first positive, it's creating new services and functions and new opportunities, but as the connection density exceeds a certain level, suddenly those systems can destabilize. Cooperation, for example, can erode. We must be aware of this. And then can lead to very undesirable phenomena, such as, for example, those cascade effects in a banking system. You remember Lehman Brothers was collapsing, and then actually hundreds of banks were collapsing as a result of this, and hundreds of billions of dollars were lost. So the question is, how can we avoid these kinds of systemic instabilities? How do we handle these kinds of problems? And there is this other idea that we need a very strong state which basically creates social order in society, which assumes that basically people would be selfish beasts without a strong state enforcing order. Well, the question is, does that work? And so we have many laws, for example, hundreds of thousands actually, and it requires strong institutions to enforce those laws. There are ever more laws and institutions, and that is extremely costly. We can see that actually debts are exploding in most industrialized countries. Swiss is one of the few exceptions actually. Most of these countries have 100% GDP per capita debts, some of them 200%, and it's not clear when we will be ever able to pay it back. So the question is, can we go on like this forever? Is this a solution, or will we just not be able to pay for it anymore? So what can we do? Bottom up didn't work, top down doesn't seem to work. Do we have any options? Well, let's listen to Albert Einstein. He said, we cannot solve our problems with the same kind of thinking that created them. And in fact, there is a third alternative. So I'd like to compare now 3 different kinds of organizing markets and societies. There is, on the one hand, the central planner, where we have a top-down organization, and also regulation happens in a top-down way. And on the other hand, we have market economies, where there is self-organization in a bottom-up way, but regulation still happens in a top-down way. These market economies are based on the concept of the homo economicus, of the selfish optimizer. And there is a third option, which I'd like to advertise today, which is the participatory market society, where we would have a bottom-up self-organization and a bottom-up self-regulation. But it requires a homo socialis. And what is that? Well, the homo socialis is conditionally cooperative. He takes self-determined but other regarding decisions, considering the impact on others. And by this, he reaches a better outcome. That means he's smarter than the Homo economicus. In fact, even Adam Smith, almost 300 years ago, was aware of this. He was writing, however selfish man may be supposed, there are evidently some principles in his nature which interest him in the fortune of others and render the happiness necessary to him, though he derives nothing from it. And there is empirical and experimental evidence for this. Some of my colleagues have found that people have fairness preferences much more than would be expected according to the concept of the selfish Homo economicus. And many people have pro-social preferences, although there are some people who behave in a selfish way that the Homo economicus implies. So then the question is, if there is this Homo socialis, what kind of organization would we need in order for him to thrive? Well, this movie gives you an example how diverse and complex systems can beautifully self-regulate if it's well constructed. And so where does information come in? Could we actually transfer that to a more complex society, assuming that we have enough information for adaptive feedback? I'd like to illustrate that actually with traffic light control in cities. And again, we will look at 3 different ways of organizing the city. So the central regulator would correspond to the optimal top-down control, and that's actually the common way to control traffic today. So there's a central traffic control authority that collects a lot of data, is then optimizing the traffic light schedule. However, for an average, a typical situation for, say, Monday morning at 10 o'clock or Friday afternoon at 4 o'clock. So we could also call this the benevolent dictator, because this decision maker tries to do the best for everybody based on the information he has. Let's compare that with bottom-up self-organization. So each intersection could actually separately minimize travel times, as a Homo economicus would do. So the intersection is a Homo economicus. And we'll compare that with bottom-up self-regulation, where there is a coordination with neighbors. That means other regarding decision-making as a Homo socialis would do. That requires information exchange between neighbors. And let's see what the outcome is. So obviously, top-down regulation is doing reasonably well. The queue length is a function of the capacity utilization of the intersection is quite reasonable. However, the selfish optimization that creates some kind of self-organization, shown by the violet line, is much superior. So the queue lengths are much shorter. However, only up to a certain capacity utilization. After this, actually, Adam Smith's invisible hand doesn't work anymore. The queue length is actually exploding. So what happens then for the other regarding optimization, the self-regulation? Well, that is actually doing as good as the Homo economicus at low utilizations and much better than any other control at high utilization. So it's clearly a superior control. Bottom-up self-regulation can outsmart optimal top-down control. And the invisible hand works. You can see over here that it creates wonderful green waves in the city. And this principle has actually been inspired by self-organized oscillations of pedestrians at bottlenecks. So in this way, we have seen that we can harness complexity by decentralization. In fact, the more complex a system becomes, and our world is becoming steadily more complex, the more decentralization we need in order to flexibly respond to the quick changes that we find in our world. Regulation and optimization cannot do that. So it's time to think about the institutions that we need to create in the 21st century. In the past, we have created public streets, public schools, public universities, public libraries and parks and botanical gardens and so on. So what do we need to establish in the 21st century? I think we need to establish open and transparent and participatory information platforms. And here, actually, 4 elements that I'd like to propose. First of all, to create something like a planetary nervous system, which is collecting information from the internet, but also through sensor networks that we are going to create within the Internet of Things. And that will allow us actually to get a picture of the world in real time about our physical and biological environment, but also about social and economic change. This kind of data could be fed into a living Earth simulator, and that would allow us to look at what-if scenarios. What would happen if we did this or that? What were the expected or unexpected side effects? What are the opportunities and risks? And all of that should be available to everybody, like Wikipedia, in a participatory way. So everybody could upload data and computer algorithms to simulate and could use it, maybe for a small fee, but we would open up data for everybody, so they would be useful for everybody. But how to make sure that these data are not misused and that we have a high quality? Well, we would need a reputation system. And in fact, there is a reason why reputation systems are spreading so quickly, because they're useful. They're useful actually for buyers and sellers. They're useful for everybody because they give us orientation, that they allow us to find friends. But we must make sure that we are creating them in a pluralistic way. We don't want to be told by a company or institutions what we see about the world and how we should think about it. It's important we can determine ourselves how to mine the data. We need to be able to create the filters and exchange them with friends and modify them. And that would create a better information ecosystem. Social media will allow us actually to build this new civilization, will allow us to find friends, not only that, also to collaborate, to cooperate, to build up projects in a self-controlled, in a self-regulating way. And we have new technologies now that allow us to bring production at home. People say that the 20th century was the century of the democratization of consumption, but the 21st century will be the age of the democratization of production. And as I said, social media will allow this to happen. So participation is the response to a growing complexity in the world. I would like to argue that we're at the verge of a new era, like at the time of Copernicus. And we have to change our way of thinking about the world. We have to learn basically that a selfish behavior will not allow us to overcome the problems. Neither individuals nor companies can do that. We also have to learn basically that we cannot rely on problems to be fixed in a top-down way. So we need to take it into our own hands. We need to learn to build up friendship networks with people who are also fair and other regarding. And then we can create a participatory, creative, and self-regulating world. Please join me to create this new civilization. Thank you.